Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1609B, and today's date is July 6, 2018, and the title of the episode is, The Moves Are Never Telegraphed. It's all happening behind closed doors. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, we know that the deep state, they are backed into a corner, and it looks like we have arrived at a crucial period of time. We know that the House resolution set Friday the deadline for the Justice Department to come clean on the beginning of its investigation into the Trump campaign. We will find out if the FBI has been lying to the public. That is, if the department complies. It has flouted so many subpoenas and played so many games with redaction and deadlines that the entire House GOP united last week to vote for the resolution demanding submission to Congress requests for documents. The vote was an order, but also a warning that this is the last chance to comply, and the next step will be to hold officials in contempt. So what is the issue? The issue is the FBI's origin story, in which it claims its full-fledged investigation into a presidential campaign was conducted as it were by the book. Now, the story, as we know, is full of holes. They are now widening. No one has explained why 2 months passed between the Papadopoulos-Downer conversation and the July 3rd probe. We've learned that it wasn't Australian intelligence that passed along the info, but Mr. Downer, personally, to State Department personnel in violation of procedure, and a growing list of Trump officials now relate moments when they were approached by suspicious figures before July 31st. That's why congressional investigators have come to suspect the real origin story is very different. They believe the FBI was investigating Trump officials well before July 31st on the basis of the dossier and dubious information from the State Department officials. They think the Bureau was employing a variety of counterintelligence tools before there was an official counterintelligence probe, and that this included deploying spies against political actors. They suspect that only when the FBI decided that it wanted to obtain a FISA warrant against Trump aide Carter Page did it surface the Downer information and make it the official pretext in July. Now remember, to order the FISA warrant, it requires an official investigation. But was there really an official investigation? Most likely not. So Trump has an even quicker way to bring the truth out. And we know that Q has mentioned this many times, where he would like Congress to ask him to declassify all the information. But Trump also can force the situation, and Q has mentioned that the issue might need to be forced where Trump goes ahead and declassifies all the information. So if this does happen, and most likely the news will come out later today, very late. Maybe there'll be another story to hide this news, and the corporate media, the mainstream media, will keep some other news in the news cycle, or maybe they'll even push an event to try to cover all of this up if this does come out later today. And we know that they don't want any of this coming out into the open. And if Trump does declassify, I'm talking about the IG report, it's game over for the deep state, and they know this. So we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out, but this is the next step, and we'll see if something happens later on this evening. Out in North Korea, we see North Korea is looking for a venue in Switzerland for a possible second summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. We see the Korean diplomats, they've been sent to Bern, Davos, and Geneva to obtain first-hand information about international conference halls and hotels, and it looks like there's another summit headed our way. We see in South Korea, people in South Korea, they don't want nukes, the THAAD missile system, in their country, and they're very angry about this, saying, we do have peace right now, and there is no reason to keep these missiles in the country. So President Moon, he's going to have to look at this situation and maybe remove the THAAD missile systems. And he did, when he first came into office, looked into this and said, whoa, we never even approved some of these things. And he wanted them taken out. But it looks like the deep state convinced him to keep them there. But at this point, it looks like he has the ability to say, you know something, there's no reason to keep the THAAD system in the country. We see Iran, they are still pushing their agenda by getting Europe and other nations to agree to their nuclear deal since the U.S. dropped out of it. France says Europe is unlikely to put together an economic package for Iran before November, and Tehran is urging them that they need something now. They need promises, they need assurances, they need to know that they're going to fund the operations that the deep state was funding when the U.S. was in the deal. And this was about siphoning money, money laundering, and all this money was covertly used to create some type of nuclear weapon to blame maybe an explosion or something, to blame it on Russia to bring us to war. So we see right now that Iran's president, Rouhani, told German Chancellor Angela Merkel over the phone that Tehran would continue cooperation with Europe if the remaining parties to the JCPOA meet Tehran's expectations. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said on Friday that the Europeans would not be able to fully compensate for companies leaving Iran due to new U.S. sanctions. So they're in a tough bind right now, and Europe might not be able to pay out what Iran needs, and this whole thing might go down the toilet here. We see that the UN, for the last couple of weeks, since Russia's in there, since Syria's in there, since they're removing the paid mercenary armies, the Islamic State, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and the rest, the UN is out there, and they're claiming that there's a high internal refugee number in the southwest of Syria due to recent fighting in the Dara Governorate. And when we review some of this evidence, it shows that these numbers are implausible. It's kind of impossible in what the UN is reporting. So over the last 2 weeks, the long-announced operation of the Syrian army and its allies to liberate the southwest Syria from terrorist organizations and rebels proceeded very well. They went into the area and they started to capture and liberate all these different areas. The UN came out and they started to report that there's so many refugees, so many people injured, so many people are getting hurt, and a lot of this information doesn't make sense. Because when we start to look at this, we see the following. Many of the areas in the southwest Syria, they've been recovered without much serious fighting at all. Many of the paid mercenaries, the moderate rebels and the rest, handed over their weapons. They're in talks with Russia and Syria. And there's really been no fighting whatsoever. Actually, a lot of them have been changing sides and joining the Syrian army, and many of them have been trying to work out deals. There are still attempts by the usual suspects to involve the U.S. into the fight by warning of the Iranian boogeyman on the border of Israel. And we're going to get into that in a little bit about what is coming and what is being planned behind closed doors. But as we know, there really are no Iranian units in southwest Syria. It's the Syrian army and the Russian forces. Other propaganda outlets raise the plight of refugees in the area, but it's not clear where those refugees are supposed to come from. The now cleared eastern part of Dara Governorate was taken via reconciliation agreements with relatively little fighting. Civilians stayed in place or have since returned. Syria is saying they want everyone to return to these liberated areas that were out a long time ago. So the UN came out and they said there was about 270,000 displaced by the violence and the fighting in the south of Syria. There's no source for the claimed number of refugees that was given. A report by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA, published around 325,000 people were displaced. And where are those numbers coming from? The UN report does not explain how, when, or why these people supposedly moved the few miles towards the Israel-occupied Golan Heights. There is no evidence that this claimed movement of IDPs, who may or may not exist, happened at all. the UN is just out there reporting information. I think this is part of the deep state trying to convince everyone there's a huge problem there, and they want the U.S. to get involved. And I think this is what the deep state is continually trying to do. We see Russia and the Free Syrian Army, they've reached a deal on an agreement in southern Syria. Under the agreement, the FSA will hand over its weapons to the Syrian Arab Army and withdraw to the opposition-held areas. And by the way, the Free Syrian Army is the paid mercenary army of the deep state. They give them all different names: the Syrian Democratic Army, the Free Syrian Army, the moderate rebels. It's all one and the same. We just call them paid mercenaries. Same thing with the terrorists. They're all one and the same. And they're going to hand over all the weapons. And the Syrian army, well, they're going to take over all these areas. Now, what's very interesting is that the Syrian army, they have seized more points along the Jordanian border. And now the Syrian army controls around 72% of the southwest Syria area, and the paid mercenary forces only control around 28%, and that number is dwindling very, very fast. Now, the OPCW, they came out with their preliminary report, and the OPCW is the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and they announced in the report that they found there was no nerve agents used in the city of Duma, in that area whatsoever. So the OPCW experts, they said they found traces of organic substances containing chlorine, which allegedly was used in the attack in Duma, along with explosive residues. Various chlorinated organic chemicals were found in samples from 2 sites, for which there is a full chain of custody. Now, the gas attack in Duma, as we know, was filmed by the White Helmets last April. They said sarin gas was used, and they filmed and orchestrated the entire thing. We know there were reporters there. We know there were many other individuals there saying that, yeah, there was really no one that was ill. And the whole thing was a staged event. And right now, the OPCW is saying, and they've done this on site, it wasn't through social media or things like that, that they really can't find any evidence whatsoever that a nerve agent was used. And it looks like those stories are coming true. We see behind closed doors there are meetings, top decision makers working together to remove the U.S. troops from the Al-Tanf area. Now, let's think about what has happened here. We know that Trump has stopped the funding to the Kurds. Trump has stopped the funding to the moderate rebels, stopped the training programs, actually redirected the Pentagon and said, go after the Islamic State. Prior to that, we know that Obama was picking the targets and the Islamic State was gaining ground and capturing more and more towns because the Air Force at that time, directed by Obama, they were bombing Syrian targets to allow the Islamic State to move forward. We know from reports on the ground, the people were tortured. They feared for their lives, while the paid mercenaries, the Islamic State, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, the rest, were in these towns and they controlled the towns. So what we're seeing right here is everything is starting to turn around now. So what Trump likes to do is he never telegraphs what he's going to do. He tries to make it seem like everything is exactly what the deep state wants. And what has been happening here is they're using the same story that Obama used. The U.S. is going after the Islamic State, but the U.S. is really going after the Islamic State. And the U.S. is in Syria to destroy terrorism, which is the Islamic State, al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. Well, when Obama said it, that wasn't the case. The case was to remove Assad. Now, the case is to remove the Islamic State, the paid mercenaries, the moderate rebels, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and the rest. So Trump has been using this narrative and trying to figure out a way to get the U.S. troops out of Syria. And it looks like they came up with a plan with Putin. Putin put it out there that they want all foreign troops to leave Syria. That's including Iran. This was done on purpose. Trump and Israel, they're using the Iranian story as a cover, where they're saying that Iran, their armed forces, they're at the border with at the Golan Heights, and they need to remove themselves, and we only want the Syrian army there. We want Syria to agree to the 1974 agreement where there's no heavy weapons or things like that, and there's a buffer zone. They're using the Iranian story that there's actual troops in there to allow the U.S. to pull out of there and Israel to pull out at the same time. This is why Netanyahu has been meeting with Putin. This is why Trump is going to meet with Putin. And once this happens, you're going to see everything change. And you're going to see there will be an announcement where the troops in Al-Tanf, because remember, the Syrian army controls 72% of the south right now. They're closing in on the Al-Tanf base. The deep state would like an all-out war, and they're going to try probably maybe one more time. They're going to try to do something, but it will fail. So when Trump and Putin meet and they put this whole thing together, most likely Putin or Assad, they will announce, or maybe together, that they are recalling the Iranian troops. They're going to be pulling out of that area. And this will be the beginning stages of the pullout of the U.S. troops from this area. And the Syrian army will then take over this entire area with Russia in the background. And I believe this is all being set up right now. But before this happens, we know that Trump and Putin are going to meet, and what is the deep state going to do? They're going to try to stop this meeting at all costs. So what that means is they will create news that might say that Russia is being aggressive, Russia is flying bombers, Russia is very close to something else, or maybe they'll make up any type of an event or something, or maybe they'll show that Russia tried to poison someone. I mean, who knows what it's going to be, but whatever they're going to do, they're going to try to stop this meeting. They don't want it to happen. Once it happens, it's going to be game over for the deep state. They know this. So we have what's happening with the deep state with Comey, Clinton, Strzok, all the indictments. We have what's happening with Trump and Putin meeting, with everything falling apart in the Middle East. And when you look around, you can see everything is falling apart all at once. And we have to go back to Q, where he says November 11th is a very important date. And I do believe this is when before this time, troops will be coming out of the Middle East. They'll be coming home. And I think the parade is going to be the parade of all parades. And I think this is all being set up to happen prior to November 11th. And then they'll have the parade on November 11th to say that we no longer need to be in Syria. Most likely, we know the Iraqi government wants U.S. troops out of there, so we'll probably see troops being pulled out of Iraq. Remember, the number of troops in these countries is a lot more than everyone thinks, because what they did was, under the agreement with Iraq, they are allowed, something like 6,000 or so plus troops in there. But in the agreement, they can have temporary troops. Temporary troops don't have an expiration date, and all they do is rotate them. So they can have 20,000 temporary troops in there, and all they have to do is say, no, they're temporary. They don't count as the full-time troops. And this is what they've done in the past. And we know that these temporary troops move into Syria from Iraq into Syria. So once again, we're going to see a lot of troops come home, a lot of troops that we didn't even know we had out there. And all of this has been hidden for a very long time. And I think this whole narrative is being created to show that we've beaten the Islamic State, even though it was created by the intelligence agencies and Obama. They controlled it. We beat the Islamic State. Iran pulled out. And now it's time for the U.S. to leave. They're going to make it look like the U.S. was very successful in this area, and they're going to bring the troops home. So we can see the plan is moving forward. We see that all the pieces are starting to come together right now. The deep state, they are floundering right now. They're in big, big trouble, and they might try some type of an event. They might stick something in the news cycle that gets everyone's emotions all riled up. They might try some type of civil war. Even though that Q said there's going to be no civil war, they might try to launch something where they try to get it off the ground, but it doesn't happen. So we don't know what's going to happen, but we know the deep state, they don't just give up. They try and they try and try, and each time they try, it gets worse and worse for them. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.